Okay, thank you, Sarah. Am I on? Yay! Welcome to Deep Dive. It is so good to see you all. I can't really see you, but I know that you're there, and we are together in spirit. My name is Kylie. I'm one of the campus pastors here at UTD, and I am very excited to get to talk to you guys tonight. But before I do that, I wanted to start by introducing myself. The people that have talked the last few weeks have done these cool little slideshows, and I was very hurt because I talked in February and just was told, like, yeah, do an introduction. Oh, okay. Great. So we are having a bit of a technical dilemma. So, a difficulty, if you will. So we're just going to wait a little bit to start. I could restart my intro and then maybe... Oh, okay, so I just went on vacation. It was super fun. I went to Lake Havasu City, Arizona with my family, and we meet some of my extended family from my mom's side, and we beach camp for a week. So no running water, no electricity. It's roughing it at its finest. So that's always very interesting because I just grew up with it, so I just think it's very normal. But then when people come that like haven't been before and they're like, oh, this is kind of hard and I'm ready to go home, I'm like insulted. But then I realize like, yes, it is hard to camp for like 5 days. So I went there. My dad has a boat, and so we are big like boating lake people, and so we tube like on the inner tubes. We wake surf, which is basically like you have like pretty much a surfboard, but it's not as long, and the boat creates a wake. And the goal is to get up with a rope, but then be able to toss it in, and the waves just like keep you propelling forward if you stay like in this certain spot. So that's pretty fun and challenging. And this was actually a new boat that we had never used before. And so it was a little upsetting because I was the guinea pig. I was the first one that was like, yeah, go surf. It was 7:30 in the morning, firstly, which is just rude. But it was also like the only time that day that the lake was going to be smooth. And so my dad was like, well, we probably should go. And I was like, okay. So it was my choice, but the water was very cold. Like during the day, it probably got up to like 90, not the water, the weather. But the weather at 7:30 was probably like 65 or 70, and then the water itself was like 65 or 70. So anyway, it was kind of a disaster, but it worked out. I got used to it. The boat felt a little different, but I got used to it. And it was good. For those of you just now joining, we were having a little bit of a technical difficulty, so I was telling the story of my recent family vacation to bide the time. But now we're back. Hello. Welcome to Deep Dive. It's so good to see you guys. I can't really see you, but I know that you're there, and I appreciate you being here. My name is Kylie. I'm one of the campus pastors here at UTD, and I'm so excited to get to talk to you guys tonight. Before I do that, I'm going to do an introduction. Before we got cut off, I was saying I was a little upset because everybody has done these really cool PowerPoints, and I have not been able to do a PowerPoint yet, which I was like, that's not fair, so I just did it this time. So first thing to know about me, I am a UTD alum, whoosh baby. I graduated May of 2019 with a business administration major. Sorry to those of you in JSOM, but I did not like it very much and thought it was a little boring. But it's just because, it wasn't something that I was like passionate about. Like some of you guys are like passionate about medicine and engineering, and I've never met somebody that's like, I'm just so passionate about business. It's just the best. So that was not me, but it taught me a lot of great things, a lot of applicable things that I'm using. So Dad, if you're watching, good use of money towards that degree. The next thing is that I am the oldest, I'm the oldest child in my family. So up on that top picture, those are all of my siblings. That's Jaron, Jordy, Zach, and Cole. So I'm the oldest. And then those are my parents in the bottom left, John and Christy. Love them. I'm a pastor's kid through and through. My dad leads the Wiley Church, that is a part of the family of churches that Focus is slightly associated to. Some of you go to Garland Northeast. I actually grew up there, and then when they planted the Wiley Church, my family moved over there, and my dad became the pastor. So I do that. I've also been dating my wonderful boyfriend, Johnny. He's in the right. That's at some Christmas thing we went to, hence the cool lights and us being dressed up. Um, we've been dating. Yeah, I'm wearing jeans. So Mandy comments, not very dressed up. To her point, it is dressed up for me. Okay, I am very dressed up right now. So we started dating a little over a year ago. And you might ask, Kylie, when is the best time to start an exclusive relationship? To which I would say, at the very beginning of a global pandemic where you know nothing that's going on around you. Literally the day before we went into shelter in place, Johnny and I decided to date exclusively. But it's been a great year. He's the sweetest, puts up with my sass. He's the best. This is my, and then my dog. This is my dog, Moose. He's so cute. He is a pandemic puppy. And he's a little wild, he's a little strange, but I love him, and he's kept me company. He stresses me out, and it's been interesting because I have gotten way more anxious about having a dog than I thought I would, so it's probably good for me to have him to practice not being so anxious about things I can't control. But we'll get to that later. So that's my dog. This is my second year doing full-time ministry. I did the apprenticeship through Focus last year, so right after I graduated. And it had a little bit of a weird, strange ending with COVID, but it did not diminish the impact that it had on my life. And because it was so great and I loved it so much, I decided to commit 3 more years to you. And so I will be around for another 3 years, and I'm super excited about that. Finally, some of the things that I love. I love Disney, just love it. Disney World, more than Disneyland, but I also like Disneyland. I love all the Disney movies. I have a Disney Plus account. It's a slight obsession. A lot of the things I own to wear are Disney related. That picture is me at Harry Potter World in 2015 as a senior in high school holding a wand and pretending I am all powerful. I love Harry Potter. I've read it 7 times. And I was in the Harry Potter Club as a kid, as like a 2nd grader. My elementary school had a Harry Potter Club, and I was a part of it. So I'm a nerd at heart. And then I also love the beach. I love being outside and being in the sun. And so that's a picture from my most recent beach trip that I went on with some of my girlfriends. So if you catch me laying outside with a book, I also love reading, then you are seeing me live my best life. And if you know these hobbies of mine, then you know me pretty well. So that's a little bit of an introduction for who I am. But before I start, I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions, and I want you to think about them for a minute. So if you want to jot down some notes, you can, or you can just keep it in your head. So the 2 questions are up on the screen. The first question is, think of someone who has had a profound positive impact on your life and why that is the case. And then think of someone who has had a significant negative impact on your life, and why is that the case? So the 2 questions are up there. I'm going to give about a minute or so for you guys to think about it, maybe jot down those people, or just think about it and think about why you would put them in those categories. Okay, so welcome back. We are going to come back to that a little later. So tonight we are going to be talking about promises and commitments. This is something that I have actually had a few conversations about this week. It's something that I feel like over the last month or so, not really knowing that this was going to be my topic, that God has kind of laid on my heart and that I've been thinking about some, which is pretty cool. So I want to encourage you to pay attention, not because I feel like I have super great words or insight, but because God takes this topic very seriously, something that he cares about. And I think we all need to be reminded of the importance of promises and commitments. Our series this semester is called A Different Kind of Kingdom, and I'm excited to talk more about how this topic of promises and commitments comes into this series. I'm going to reference the article, The Power of Promising by Lewis Smedes, quite a bit. It's a resource that was really helpful in preparing this message. We also have it on our website, anyfocus.org, if you want to go back and read it, and I would encourage you to do so. Just the way that he writes and some of the things that he says are just so powerful. So I would definitely encourage you guys to go back and read it, but you'll hear some of it in my message tonight. And then I also don't mean that promises and commitments are separate things. So I'm very much talking about them in direct relation to each other. So if I use the word interchangeably, know that I'm not contrasting them. I actually think that they work hand in hand together. So those are just the little caveats I wanted to start with. So by show of hands, wherever you are, raise your hand if you've ever made a promise. Okay. Raise your hand if you have things that you're committed to right now, be it school, a job, a relationship, friendships. Great, so this topic applies to all of us. Okay, so we're going to jump in. Even though a promise is one thing, it's one unit, there are actually two parts to a promise, the making and the keeping. I cannot keep a promise if I have not made it. And once I have made a promise, I have to follow through and keep it for it to actually hold as a promise. So we're going to break this sermon into 4 points. Ooh, keeping you on your toes, not doing a traditional 3-point sermon, but 4 points. And the first point is making promises. So for you note takers, which hopefully we're all taking notes, point 1 is making promises. Making promises. So we have all made promises. Even as a kid, if you were really, really serious about a promise, you made a pinky promise. It was like, whoa, that's serious. What is the definition of a promise? A promise defined by Webster's dictionary is a declaration that one will do or refrain from doing something specified. So we're going to come back to that definition a few times, but the key word that I want you to remember is declare. Okay, so it's a declaration. So we've all probably made explicit promises where we use that exact word, promise, to emphasize the commitment. Promising to me as a kid meant that you were really serious about following through with what you said you would do. So, for example, I tell my sister, are you gonna do this? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, do you promise? And she's like, yes. Because it's a lot more serious for some reason to just use the exact word or to use the word swear. I swear that I'll do it. And we even affirm sometimes our yes. We think it's more of like a definite or a sure yes than just saying yes. So I don't have to say the word promise for it to be a defined promise, because based on the definition of a promise, it's simply a declaration that you will or won't do something specified. So simply by declaring that I will or will not do something, I have made a promise or a commitment to a person or a cause. Marriage is the biggest commitment that you can make outside of committing your life to Jesus. So on the day of the wedding, we've all been to weddings and ceremonies, I think. The vows are promises that the couple exchanges with each other in front of a crowd of witnesses. So to have and to hold in the good times and bad, through sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live, to you and you alone do I make this vow. That is a serious promise and a serious commitment. Or when a college athlete, or a high school athlete rather, commits to a school, to a college, I mean, there is a big signing day and their family comes, and sometimes a school, even if it's in a different state, will send a representative to the high school. And there's like this table set up with these like flowers and this banner and they're all wearing like a school shirt and the school colors, just to see this 18-year-old make a promise or a commitment that they will be at this university to play the designated sport and won't commit themselves to any other college. Okay, so that's a pretty big deal. Even before getting a dog or having a baby. It's been interesting because whenever I've had a dog, sometimes there's been nights that he's kept me up and I'm like, is this what parenting is like? So I think it is slightly preparing me for if I ever have kids, but those are big commitments to make because you're saying that you're going to care for and nurture this being that is alive, whether it be an animal or a person. So these are examples of bigger promises. But we make promises and commit to things every day. When I tell Mandy I will be at her house at 11 a.m. on Fridays for our designated meeting, then I'm committing to her that I will be at a certain place at a certain time for that meeting every week. If I tell a friend that I'll be at Chiloso at 9 a.m. for breakfast, get in on that Chiloso breakfast if you've never had it, I have made a commitment to them. If I tell our staff that I will be in charge of something, like this sermon, then I am making a commitment that it will be done by 7 o'clock on the Friday that I am scheduled to preach. So fill in the blank with whatever you want to say, but when I tell someone I will do something, I am declaring something to them. I am making a promise. Jesus says in Matthew 5:37, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no." Anything beyond that comes from the evil one. I think a lot of times we think we have to say the word promise or swear for us to be bound to it, like it is a firmer yes. But why is the making of promises so important? Why is the making of promises so important? Lewis Smedes, in the article Power of Promising, says, "The only way to overcome the unpredictability of your future is the power of promising. If forgiving is the only remedy for your painful past, promising is the only remedy for your uncertain future." I can be a pretty anxious person sometimes, and I'm also a planner. I like when there's a plan. I like sticking to a plan. And as I was reading this article and read this section, I was like, oh, maybe that's why planning feels so good and so safe for me. Because when I make a promise, I'm doing the only thing that can remedy the uncertainty that is the future. Okay. So, we serve a promise-making God. Smead says only one thing affirms that the human romance will have a happy ending and that the earth will be populated one day by a redeemed family living in justice and shalom. The one thread by which everything hangs is a promise spoken and not forgotten. The one thread by which everything hangs is a promise spoken and not forgotten. So I want you to think of that image hanging by a thread. So there's an image up on your screen right now. It's a rope that is literally held together by one thread. When I think of it, because of my dog, I think of his stuffed animals. And he is a shredder. He likes to have a toy and then be like, all right, cool. In a few days, this is not going to look like a toy because he destroys it. So you have this stuffed animal. It's sewn together by thousands of threads. And it's holding it together. My dog will shred and rip those threads until the animal is basically in two pieces. And I can literally see the one string, the one thread that's holding these two pieces of this stuffed animal together. And it's so fragile. If I took this animal and just went, zop, it would break. It's just one tiny little string. I know, zop. Those are my noises. So the one thread that everything, our destiny, the purpose of why we live, what we will become when we aren't on this earth anymore, hangs by a promise made by our God to us. It's a pretty big deal. God's very identity is a promise to us. In Exodus 3:13 through 14, for a little bit of context, Moses is walking and he hears this voice, this presence speaking to him from this bush that is on fire but not burning. That's the first thing that'll catch your attention. You're like, okay, it's not burning, but it is on fire. So there's this burning bush, and this voice and this presence is talking to him, telling him what to do to deliver his people. So in Exodus 3:13 through 14, Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites." So if you're like me reading this, you're like, what the heck is he saying? Like, I am who I am? Like, that's not really like a name that I would think, to give God. So I read a commentary that helped me understand a bit more what God is saying here. So what should I tell them? Who is sending me? The first word of that phrase is aya. Probably not saying it correctly, but it's a state of being verb, a singular state of being verb, followed by, an action. So aya followed by an action can be I am feeding the sheep. I am building a house. It's a state of being, but alone by itself, just the word, it means that God is. I am. So God is, period. I am is the ultimate statement of self-sufficiency, self-existence, and immediate presence, not contingent on any outside factor. He is, regardless of the situation, time, place, environment, he is, period. He is with us always, and that is a promise. I am is a promise to us. He made a promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:2 through 3. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. He didn't explicitly say that this was a promise. He just says, I will. Remember how we talked about earlier that a promise is just a declaration of something you will or will not do. So when God says, I will, he is making a promise, a covenant. His yes means yes. In Genesis 17, he tells Abraham that Sarah will have a child in her old age. He tells the Israelites in Exodus 6:5 through 6, "Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore tell the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians and deliver you from your bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians." And throughout the narrative of Scripture, despite their sin and even disbelief in him at times, he continues to make promises to his people. It is in his identity, his character, to make and keep promises. So when we make a promise or a commitment, Smedes says that we are as close to being like God as we can ever be. When you say to anyone that you will be there for them, you will be there for them. You are only a millimeter beneath the angels. What a cool statement. What a cool image. So before we move on to our next, to finish us off, we're going to take a little bit of a break. And in this break, go do what you got to do. Go to the bathroom, grab a snack, and we're going to put a timer up and be watching it, and then we will be back.
Five, four, three, two, one.
The people go crazy. Okay, welcome back to Deep Dive. Before I jump back in, we're going to have our testimony time. So you guys just give a warm welcome from where you are to Darby.
Hello. I'm going to lift this up. I did not print out my notes. So, hi, I'm Darby. I graduated from UTD in 2018, and now I'm working for Denton Focus. So, a little TW, I don't know how to do it. I should. It's fine. I'm here to talk about committing to friendship. So my junior year of college, I started praying about who God wanted me to be friends with for the rest of my life. That previous summer, I had gone to Sikkim, and we were talking about seasons of friendship and how only a few of them last a lifetime. That was something a little bit shocking to me because I hadn't had consistent friends growing up. I didn't really think anyone would want to commit to friendship for a lifetime. So I had one friend from high school, but we would talk like maybe once every 6 months. And most of my friendships then were just seasonal. In reading and coming to know Scripture more, I noticed God's character and his affinity to make promises to his people. God is a God of promises, and I wanted to be a person of promises. I wanted to replicate God's character that way in my friendships. I wanted to commit to someone for the long haul, despite where life would take us. I wanted to create space for security and longevity where I hadn't experienced it before. I'd seen friendships come and go over the years and with those around me. I wanted more than that. So we read an article in Peer Team called The Power of Promising. And you already heard this quote, but it's a good quote, so I'll read it again. It says, "The only way to overcome the unpredictability of your future is the power of promising. If forgiving is the only remedy for your painful past, promising is the only remedy for your uncertain future." I didn't want to spend the rest of my life insecure in my friendships, constantly asking for more. I wanted to choose and decide to invest in relationship despite what would come my way. I'd notice as well that if you didn't put any effort into your relationships, not much would come of it. Initial friendships came relatively easy for me, but the longevity required that I was consistent and willing to put in that effort. So I prayed some time about that and decided one of those people would be Emily Umstead. So I would like to reiterate that it's not reasonable to commit to every one of your friends in this way because you have limited capacity for this type of long-term friendship. But she was someone who loves the Lord, who encouraged me to grow, and I was a better person for being around her. I decided that I would commit to friendship with her and promise her that I would continue to put in that effort. It was a little bit awkward asking someone to be my friend, but like many things, it was worth it. Kind of like the, "Do you want to date me? I want to date you" conversation, but a little bit different. In those conversations, I wasn't saying I'm going to commit to living in the same city as you for the rest of my life, but more along the lines of, I want to commit to friendship for the rest of our lives. I want us to have friendship despite the uncertainty of our future. And I had similar conversations with a girl in my peer team this last year. She wanted me to talk to her about friendship and think through that. And she made a list of friends to invest in and continue with and included my name in it. And she was like, "I really want to be your friend for the rest of my life. And you're my peer team leader." And I told her that I wanted that too. That was just a neat moment. Like I said, doesn't happen super often, but I'll go back to Emily. So friendship has looked different throughout the years. I think it's been 5 years now. When we were in college, we got to do ministry as Corfas. We were never Kofas, but Corfas. We hung out regularly and invited others into our friendship. And when I was doing pre-E and considering marriage with Drew, she was part of thinking through if that was a good idea or not. When I needed a place to stay for a month before I got married, she offered up her home to me. When we graduated, she moved to Arlington, and we got to do the apprenticeship together. And I would eventually move to Denton, and we had to sort through figuring out how to do friendship in different cities. One Thanksgiving, when Emily's family was out of country to visit Claire, her sister, I got to invite her to spend the week with my family and Drew's family. And we've gotten to know and love each other's family in the process. And I think we only think about commitment when we're getting married. And so no wonder American Christians struggle with that, to commit. Choosing to commit to friendship with Emily has helped me think through commitment with my husband. I get to live out some of the ups and downs before I committed to him. I knew that I was a person who could keep promises. It's definitely different committing to friends versus committing to a spouse, but she's my friend, and I wanted us to be a part of each other's lives. If the Lord wills it, I want Emily to be a part of my children's life, and vice versa. And like I mentioned before, our families have connected in a really neat way because of our friendship. I think that's pretty sweet. Drew knows that Emily is going to be a part of my life and respects that. He isn't upset when I spend time with her. He encourages me to build relationships with others. There are things in friendships that I can't get from him and he can't get from me. Friendship is so important because we're not meant to live in isolation. We're meant to live in community and have other people know us and see us other than our spouse. And committing to friendships does that. It helps us think outside of ourselves and invest in the well-being of others. It teaches us how to make promises and keep them.
That was really good. Also, look at this. This is where Darby put the stand, and you can barely see my face. So we're going to go down here. Thank you, Darby. That was really, really good. So we just talked about making promises. We heard Darby talk about making a promise or a commitment to her friendship. So why don't we make promises? So this is the second point. Our reasons for not making promises and commitments. So people tend to place a lot of emphasis on keeping promises, but if we never even make a promise, there's not one to keep. So one reason I feel that we give for not making promises is fear that we won't be able to keep them. So I'm not going to commit to this event that's coming up on Saturday because if something else happens that I would rather go to, I want to be free to change my mind and not go back on my word. That's better, right? It's better to just not commit than to break a commitment. I saw a quote that said, if you don't like to make excuses or apologies, stop making promises. Think about that. If you don't like to make excuses or apologies, stop making promises. It's pretty harsh, but that is how we live sometimes concerning making promises. Ultimately, this excuse is rooted in losing freedom by making a promise or a commitment. But like we talked about earlier, making promises is actually very freeing because we stake our claim on the future. Smedes writes, when we make a promise, we take it on our feeble wills to keep a future rendezvous with someone in circumstances we cannot possibly predict. We take it on ourselves to create our future with someone else, no matter what fate or destiny may have in store. This is almost ultimate freedom. It sounds contradictory to gain freedom by losing it, but that is what happens when we make promises. Making promises allows me to experience freedom from some of the anxieties I have about the future and the uncertainty of the future, and allows the person I promise something to experience freedom from anxiety or uncertainty from the future. Another reason is just laziness and apathy. It takes work to follow through with a promise. It costs you something. It costs you freedom, as we talked about earlier. It could be inconvenient or unideal. But if I don't make a promise, I don't have to put in the work to keep it. This kind of bleeds in with the last reason I wanted to touch on, which is selfishness. Our plans revolve around us, what I want to do, my convenience, my comfort. We aren't even afraid that we won't keep a commitment. We just don't want to. I want y'all to make a list in your head, briefly, of some of the promises that God has made to us. So I want you to think about that for a second. What are some of the promises that God has made to us? Okay, so here's some that I came up with. Genesis 28:15. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Isaiah 54:10. Though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, yet my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed, says the Lord who has compassion on you. Romans 10:9-10. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. That's James 1:5. Guys, what would our fate, what would our future be if God did not make these promises to us? That's a scary thought. A lot of the peace that I have about my future comes from the promise that God is I am. He is there. Not only is he there, but in Matthew 28:20, he says, surely I am with you always. So God is he who will be there with us, with you, wherever you go. We'll talk about the keeping of promises in a bit, but there wouldn't have been a promise to keep if God hadn't gone there and made that commitment to us in the first place. And he even knew we would be unfaithful to him. Can you imagine marrying somebody knowing that they would cheat on you, but marrying them anyway? That's bizarre. You're like, no, thank you, next. Not going to do that. But guys, who would we be and where would we be if God did not choose us and love us every day despite our unfaithfulness to him? If he had not made this promise to be there with us, to redeem our broken world, what kind of hopeless world would we live in? It's one of the most beautiful things to me about God, and one of the things that's so hard for me to believe, because it just is so unbelievable when you say it. But that is who he is. He is I am, and he is there. So we've talked about the first half of a promise, which is the making. So now to the second half, which is keeping. So the third point is keeping promises. Keeping promises. So great, you've made a promise, but the commitment doesn't end there, because now you have to follow through with it. It's not only in God's character to make promises, but also to follow through with them. Keeping promises does come at a cost, right? I mean, we've talked about that. We talked about it some earlier, but you do give up some of your freedom when you make and keep a promise. Promise keeping is a powerful means of grace in a time when people hardly depend on each other to remember their word or to live by their word. When we make a promise, we bind ourselves to keep the promise that we're making. So yes, we might lose some freedom, but what do we gain? What do we gain? As people of God, we reflect him and his promise-keeping nature when we follow through with our own commitments, when we let our yes be yes. And as we continue to keep promises, we build our character in integrity, and we look more and more like him. We become someone that other people can depend on and trust in a time when people hardly depend on each other to remember and live by their word and their commitments anymore. Smedes writes, when you make a promise, you tie yourself to other persons by the unseen fibers of loyalty. You agree to stick with people you are stuck with. When everything else tells them they can count on nothing, they can count on you. When they do not have the faintest notion of what in the world is going on around them, they will know that you are going to be there with them. You have created a small sanctuary of trust within a jungle of unpredictability. You have made a promise that you intend to keep. Guys, don't you want to be somebody like that? When you hear that, doesn't it just make you go, yes, I want to be that person? As an Enneagram 6, that is what I am. It is called the Loyalist. It just makes me want to hoot and holler, because loyalty is so important to me, and I feel so safe and cared for when someone says that they will do something and I know that they're going to follow through with what they say. It means a lot to me. So when you keep a promise or a commitment, you have created a sanctuary of trust in a jungle of unpredictability. I loved Darby's testimony and her commitment to Emily, that no matter what happens in life, where they live, the different stages of life that they're in, that they are going to follow through with their commitment to friendship. And she's right, it does take a lot of anxiety and uncertainty out of the picture, not just in making the promise to each other, but knowing that the person that has promised something to you has integrity and they mean what they say. It's a part of their character, who they are, that you know that their yes will be yes. And this is serious to God. It matters to him and to the people in our community that we are people of integrity and that we stick to our word. The definition of integrity has changed over the years in terms of how people use it. So defined, having integrity requires staying true to your word, even if it's difficult, inconvenient, or expensive. But today, I hear more and more people using the word as if it means being true to themselves, even if that means leaving someone else to clean up the mess and do what they need to do for them. So that phrase, be true to yourself, actually comes from Hamlet. The line was, to thine own self be true. And if you've read Hamlet, or if you haven't, I will give you the context of the story. In context with the story, the phrase comes after advice about being prudent and preserving friendships. So the idea is that we are true to ourselves so that others can count on what we say. It was about having true integrity. But now it has taken on this other meaning of, okay, be true to yourself. And so if whatever you feel, you just act on that feeling. If it's not good for you, cut it off. If it's not serving you, leave it behind. Okay, so that's what that phrase means now, more generally in society. So when I say we want to be people in a community of integrity, I mean the original definition and not what it has become. So now, reasons we give for not keeping promises. So this is our fourth point, our reasons for not keeping promises. One reason we don't keep our promises is that it's just hard. It comes at a cost, the cost of our freedom. We have to plan around the commitments we have made, whether that means leaving at a certain time to get there, using gas, stopping something that we're doing like studying or gaming to keep our commitment, or saying no to other things that come up after you've already made a previous commitment. Selfishness bleeds into this. Sometimes we just don't want to keep our commitments. It's hard, it takes effort. It's not what we want to do, so we break a promise that we made. But do you think that Jesus wanted to keep his commitment to die on the cross for us? It's not very appealing. I mean, we see in Luke 22:42 that Jesus asked God to take the cup from him. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to suffer and go through the pain that he knew was coming. But the second part of that verse shows that he is a promise keeper. Not my will, but yours be done. And he did. He followed through with it. He was committed to keeping the covenant and the commitment that he made to us, even when it meant that he would give his own life to keep it. Jesus had every reason to break his promise. He knew we would be unfaithful to him and break our promise through sin every day. He knew that we didn't deserve it. He knew it would be hard and that the road ahead was full of pain and suffering, and true pain and true suffering, not just inconvenience, but true pain and suffering. A lot of the reasons we give for breaking promises are not rooted in anything other than selfishness and inconvenience. We just don't want to leave the house. We don't want to stop doing what we're doing to show up or commit ourselves to something when another plan could come that's better or more suited to what we want to do. We again look to marriage, right? So it's been mentioned a couple times. Some of you guys want to get married someday, and that's great. Marriage is great. But how do you expect to uphold one of the biggest commitments to another person that you can make if you can't even show up to small things like a lunch or an event or a core? We can practice being promise keepers in the small things, which will help prepare us for some of these bigger commitments we make down the road, some like what Darby talked about. Think back to that question that I asked at the beginning about someone who had a positive impact on your life and someone who had a negative impact. I guarantee that the difference between those people is whether or not they kept their word, their promise, or their commitment to you. It is important, and it's something that we remember in our relationships with each other. A little caveat to all of this of making and keeping promises. Smead says there are promises we should never make, and there are some promises once made that nobody should keep. The power of promise making is easily perverted. Like alcohol, promises can be put to silly and sinister uses. Besides, life gets so complicated and we get too muddle-headed that to keep one promise sometimes requires us to break another. We foul the lines. To say that we ought to be careful when we make our promises only underscores the truth our generation has almost forgotten. A promise is a godlike thing, and it is the only human hold we have on our future. We should not make promises that we do not intend to keep. God takes promise making and keeping seriously, and so should we. In the same way that our yes is our yes, our no is no. If someone invites you to something, but you have a previous commitment, just be honest. Hey, I really wish I could be there, but I made another commitment. And then maybe then there is an opportunity to make a new promise to that person. But I would love to get time together next week, or let's do something else. Let me plan something else. Or, like Smead says, to keep one promise sometimes requires us to break another. We might promise the same thing to two different people and be unable to keep one of those promises. In those cases, we can make an effort to amend the promise we made by, rescheduling or just reiterating our care to those people. We want to let others know that they are important to us, so much so that even if I can't hold to a commitment, I will do everything in my power to make it right. We aren't super people. We can't be a million places at one time, but we can do our best to make every situation right and be intentional with the people that we are promising to in that way. We might promise to do something sinful. In that case, we shouldn't keep that promise, but we should try to repent and make it as right as we can. We might promise something that isn't ours to promise, like giving something that isn't ours to give. In that case, we shouldn't make that promise or keep it. So these are some examples of times that we should not make or keep promises. In case I haven't said it enough, promise making and keeping is serious and important to God, and so it's something that we should take very seriously and be careful about. So, what do I want you to take away from this message? Promise making and keeping is essential to building our community on a sturdy foundation. Another quote from Smead's that's on your screen says, "Promises summon the sort of social integrity that lays the ground floor for all community. Life together survives as a human togetherness, not on a diet of warm feelings, but on the tough fibers of promise keeping. It is not easy. There are times when the inner logic and deserving needs of self-fulfillment seduce us to opt for self-maximizing, even if to maximize ourselves, we need to break promises to others. Promising and keeping promises is the toughest social duty of our time. But down the pike, it is the only human, the only redemptive way. I want us to be people who let our yes be yes and our no be no, especially practicing that with each other in this community. One way our community practices this is through our leader commitments. So all of our student leaders, who we call Corfas, sign or commit to these leadership commitments at the beginning of the school year. So this is a way that we can take part in building character and integrity in our community amongst the people that do a large part of our ministry on campus. So your Corfas commit to you, the body, and we take that very seriously. All of our focus staff make a commitment to this community for a certain duration of time to show that we're serious about committing to you, our students. That no matter what comes our way over the 1 or 3 or 5 years, that we will be faithful to you and serve you as best we can. That you can trust that we are going to be here for the time that we say we're going to be here, and that we are committed to you. There's a sister ministry in Washington that we do Sikkim with in typical years. One of their staffers had just finished his apprenticeship year and committed 5 years to staying on their staff when he got hit by a drunk driver while bicycling and was paralyzed from the waist down. So he has been learning over the last year how to do life in a wheelchair. With this year being a pandemic year, a lot of ministry has been done online, and that guy has actually been able to continue in his commitment to their staff by doing Zoom and online ministry for this school year. He plans to move back to Bellingham, where he serves within the next couple months, and is continuing in his 5-year commitment on their staff, even despite something so tragic and unexpected and pretty debilitating happening to him. So I just thought that that was another example of keeping promises that was so powerful and ministered a lot to me, being on a staff, just like thinking about that situation and realizing how seriously he's taking this commitment to his community. An easy way for anyone in our community to do this is by showing up to CORE. So CORE is a once-a-week commitment for 10 months, an hour and a half a week. That's it. Oftentimes when there's a test or I'm stressed out about school or there's a concert or I just don't want to go, then we just don't go. When we do that, we're breaking a commitment that we made to that little piece of our community for the year. But again, if you can't show up an hour and a half a week for 10 months, what makes you think you can keep big commitments like marriage or having kids? Showing up to events that we have is another small way that you can practice making and keeping commitments in our community. We do events to get to know each other, to be in the body together and just have fun. So when we pass sign-ups around, that's an opportunity for you to make a commitment, and then showing up is a way that you can follow through and keep your promise. These seem like such small things, but like we've been saying, promise making and promise keeping is important to God, and we can build character over time by practicing in the small ways before we get to those big commitments later down the road. I love how Darby said that God is a promise-keeping God, so she wants to be a person of promises. So that is what I want to leave you with. Let's be people who make commitments to God and to each other that we intend to keep. People who are pillars of certainty in a world of uncertainty for the people around us. Let's be promise-making and keeping people in the way that our God has been toward us. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to move on. God, thank you so much for being who you are. I thank you for this community and the way that we get to experience you in it. And I pray that we would, just think more and take more seriously the making and keeping of promises, that you would give us opportunities to do that, and that we would model you and how we do that in our day-to-day lives individually and how our community does that for the people around us. We love you so much and are just so thankful for you. And in your name we pray.